They said it would never happen. They said Canada was too cold, too late, too tied to the US pipeline leash. But on June 30th, 2025, something historic shattered decades of energy dependence. The first ever Canadian liquefied natural gas, LNG shipment set sail to Asia. And no, it didn't go through the United States. This wasn't just a cargo ship full of gas. This was a geopolitical explosion, and Washington didn't see it coming. For over 30 years, Canada quietly played the role of loyal supplier, pumping 8.8 billion cubic feet of gas per day through US pipelines, feeding America's hunger for cheap, clean energy. That gas brought in $8 billion in US revenue in 2024 alone. But it also came with a cost: total dependency. One tariff from Trump, and the whole system cracked. On March 4th, 2025, the Trump administration, locked in a cold-blooded economic face-off, delivered a blow: a 25% tariff on most Canadian exports and a specific 10% penalty on natural gas. In a single move, US buyers turned cold. Canadian gas became uncompetitive. Contracts were frozen. Prices surged. America cheered, but they cheered too soon. What Washington didn't anticipate was Canada's Plan B. A $40 billion megaproject years in the making, LNG Canada, suddenly became more than an infrastructure dream. It became the country's emergency escape hatch. On that fateful day in June, the gas log Glasgow, loaded with 2.66 million tons of chilled LNG, slipped past American pipelines and into Pacific waters, bound straight for Asia. And guess who was watching? China, Japan, South Korea. Three of the world's biggest energy importers, locked in a post-Russia energy crisis and desperate for a stable, neutral source of LNG. Until now, they relied on Qatar, the US, and Australia. But then came the maple leaf. Canada had just entered the game, and it wasn't playing nice. This first shipment didn't just mark a new route. It marked the rebirth of Canadian sovereignty in energy. For the first time in modern history, the US could no longer weaponize its pipeline position. Trump's tariffs, designed to crush, had backfired and launched a new trade superpower across the Pacific. So how did Canada pull it off? And what happens now that the game board has changed? Stay tuned, because in Block 2, we go deep into the billion-dollar infrastructure play that made it all possible. And the secret deals with Japan, Korea, and even China that Washington hoped would never happen. You don't just wake up one day and beat a superpower. What happened on June 30th was no accident. It was a move 10 years in the making. And behind that historic LNG shipment to Asia lies a colossal project few outside Canada believed would succeed. Let's rewind. The year was 2015. Global oil prices were crashing. Canada was bleeding investment. Its gas was cheap, but it had one fatal flaw: no way out. With 100% of its exported natural gas flowing south through American pipelines, Canada was trapped. That meant one thing: Washington had full leverage. So Ottawa did something bold. It partnered with 5 energy titans: Shell, UK, Petronas, Malaysia, PetroChina, Mitsubishi, Japan, and Korea Gas, KOGAS, and quietly launched a $40 billion mega-venture called LNG Canada. The plan? Build a liquefaction terminal at Kitimat, British Columbia, and punch a 670-kilometer pipeline straight through the wilderness to connect remote Montney shale fields to the Pacific. It was called insane. Too expensive. Too cold. Too remote. But guess what? They did it. Through snowstorms, lawsuits, environmental battles, and exploding construction costs, the Coastal GasLink pipeline was completed. Over 50,000 workers built it across some of the roughest terrain in North America. Every kilometer was a middle finger to the US pipeline monopoly. Every weld was a countdown to independence, and now it's running at full throttle. That pipeline feeds into 2 massive liquefaction trains at Kitimat, powered not by coal or diesel, but by British Columbia's clean hydroelectricity. The result? LNG Canada is now one of the greenest LNG facilities on Earth. A fact that made Asian buyers sit up and listen. But here's what Washington really didn't want you to know. Japan, South Korea, and China weren't just watching. They were already signing. Long before the first cargo sailed, quiet negotiations had already locked in long-term offtake agreements. Japan, desperate to move away from Russian gas, committed to buying 20 million tons of LNG per year starting in 2026. South Korea, aiming to expand its LNG storage capacity by 50%, gave Canadian contracts top priority. And China? It inked deals through intermediaries, avoiding headlines but not hiding its intent. For these nations, the math was simple: cheaper than US gas, cleaner than coal, and politically neutral. No American tariffs, no Qatar embargoes, no Russian pressure. Just pure Canadian energy, fast, clean, and reliable. Even more shocking, the route to Asia was half as long. Shipping from Kitimat to Yokohama takes just 10 days. Compare that to the 20-day journey from US Gulf ports through the Panama Canal. That's not just faster, that's tens of millions saved per shipment. And here's where it gets personal for Washington. The more Canada ships east, the less it needs to send south. Already, American buyers are panicking. US gas prices have surged. Importers are scrambling. Canada, once dependent, is now dictating terms. And while Trump's tariffs were meant to punish, they accidentally pushed Canada into Asia's arms and cut America out of the game. But don't think it ends here, because LNG Canada isn't stopping at one terminal. Shell and its partners are already preparing for Phase 2, doubling capacity to 28 million tons per year, putting Canada in direct competition with global giants like Qatar, Australia, and even the United States. And guess what? Asian buyers are ready. They want more. They want cleaner. They want stable. And Canada, once laughed off as a cold, landlocked player, now controls one of the hottest energy supply chains on Earth. But that raises one burning question. Will Washington fight back? We reveal how Trump's next move could spark a full-blown trade war, what Phase 2 means for the global LNG market, and how Canada's Indigenous partnership model might just rewrite the rules of global energy forever. It started with one ship. It might end with a seismic shift in global power. When the gas log Glasgow quietly pulled out of Kitimat on June 30th, loaded with 2.66 million tons of chilled Canadian LNG, few in Washington paid attention. But within days, phones were ringing off the hook in D.C., and not from allies. They were from oil executives, pipeline lobbyists, and furious trade officials. We just lost control of the Northern Corridor. That's what a senior aide reportedly told a Senate Energy Committee staffer just hours after the shipment made global news. And it wasn't just about energy, it was about influence. For decades, the U.S. used its energy infrastructure to dominate Canada's gas flow. By controlling the pipelines, it controlled the leverage. That leverage was used in trade talks, in tariff threats, and in shaping cross-border deals. Now, gone. LNG Canada's new maritime route effectively bypasses America. No Panama Canal tolls, no Trump tariffs, no D.C. interference. And that's when Washington woke up. By mid-July, trade insiders leaked that the Trump administration was considering a Phase 2 tariff escalation. This time, not just on Canadian exports to the U.S., but on LNG-related tech components supplied by American firms to Canadian liquefaction sites. A targeted strike. A warning shot. Why? Because Phase 2 of LNG Canada is now real, and it's massive. Shell, Petronas, Mitsubishi, Kogas, and PetroChina have greenlit final feasibility studies for doubling capacity to 28 million tons per year. That would catapult Canada into the global top 5, directly threatening U.S. LNG exports, especially to Asia. What makes this more than economics is timing. As global sanctions intensify against Russian gas and Middle Eastern supply routes remain vulnerable, Asia is in desperate need of politically neutral, environmentally clean LNG. Canada checks every box, and Trump knows it. That's why U.S. trade hawks are now lobbying for a national security review of LNG exports, a rarely used mechanism that could be aimed at Canadian infrastructure, claiming indirect risks to U.S. energy stability. It's legal jujitsu. But it could work unless Canada beats them to the punch. And that's exactly what Ottawa is planning. Behind the scenes, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's cabinet, backed by former Bank of Canada Governor and Energy Advisor Mark Carney, is preparing a counter-tariff strategy. It involves deepening partnerships with Japan and South Korea, fast-tracking Canadian LNG ports on the East Coast, aimed at Europe, and issuing export guarantees through federal financing arms. But Canada's most powerful weapon? Its Indigenous alliance. Unlike many megaprojects that bulldoze over communities, LNG Canada was built with them. Over $5.8 billion in contracts have been signed with local businesses and the Haisla Nation. The community holds equity stakes in the pipeline. Training programs have funneled thousands of Indigenous workers into high-skill energy jobs, and with ESG scores among the highest in the world, Asian buyers see this as a rare fusion of ethical energy and economic security. It's no longer just a gas deal. It's a new energy doctrine. But the question remains, can Canada sustain it? Phase 2 will demand tens of billions in new capital. Construction in northern British Columbia's frozen terrain costs 50% more than along the U.S. Gulf. Environmental watchdogs are preparing lawsuits. Carbon tax debates are heating up again. And public opinion remains divided. Yet the tide is turning. Canadian LNG vessels are now being tracked by global commodity traders. Asian buyers are locking in 10-year contracts. Europe is quietly watching, ready to follow if East Coast terminals are approved. And for the first time in modern history, Canada is in the driver's seat. Meanwhile, the U.S. is facing blowback. American importers are angry. They want Canadian gas, but not with tariffs. Domestic producers are hiking prices. Utility companies are caught in the middle, and Trump's base, many of whom work in downstream manufacturing, is starting to feel the pinch. So what's next? Will Washington double down on tariffs and risk a North American trade rift? Or will it blink and re-enter negotiations from a position of weakness? One thing is certain: Canada's LNG gamble paid off. From a pipeline-dependent junior player, it has emerged as a geopolitical force in the clean energy race. Kitimat is now more than a dot on the map. It's a symbol, a message, a warning. Don't underestimate the North. And as vessels keep leaving Canadian ports for Yokohama, Busan, and Singapore, the global LNG market is being redrawn in real time. America once believed it held the pen, but Canada just took it and wrote a new chapter.